Alright, so with the latest patch, ArenaNet wanted to bring power quickness chronomancers back into the meta by buffing their most frequently used weapon, the Greatsword. Gee whiz, that's perfect! I'm sure no other Mesmer specialization uses Greatswords. Wait, why is my chrono throwing daggers again? Yeah, they didn't hit the mark with that one. Anyway, today I'll be explaining the power Virtuoso rotation in a way that you actually understand it rather than just remember it. I'll be using this build you can see on the screen right now. If you want more details such as equipment, runes, sigils, you can always find them in the description of this video. But in this video I'll be mostly focusing on how the rotation works and why it works. So let's start. At its core, the rotation is split into two cycles, the Greatsword cycle and the Dagger Sword cycle, both which are remarkably similar. Considering that there are different weapon sets, they have basically the same exact abilities, just with different levels of shiny. Anyway, your most important abilities are the Phantasms. They deal the most damage and are the main reason why you even want to switch the weapons in the first place. So, what are your Phantasms? On your Greatsword, it's the GS4, while on your sword, it's the S5. You always want to start every cycle by using a Phantasm first, and then you want to end every cycle by using a Phantasm again. So if we are using the Greatsword, we are gonna use the GS4 immediately, wait for a little bit, GS4 again, then switch the weapons, S5, wait for a little bit, S5 again, then switch. Now try it yourself. As I've already mentioned, your weapons have remarkably similar abilities, and there is no better testament to that than the weapon skill 2, which on both the weapons is pretty much the same exact ability, and we are gonna be treating it as such. So what I want you to do now is to use the weapon skill 2 after you use your Phantasms, but since it has a much lower cooldown, you can squeeze in one more into every cycle. Now try it. 4-2-4-2 switch, 5-2-5-2 switch. It's almost like a dance, isn't it? The reason it works is because both of your Phantasms have exactly 12-second cooldown, and both your weapon skill 2s have 5-second cooldown, which goes up to 6 if you include the animation, so they align perfectly and you can start and end every cycle with a Phantasm into weapon skill 2. Anyway, next up, weapon skill 3. The weapon skill 3 is the only weapon skill which does not follow the rule of being the exact same on both weapon sets. Now, it does have the same role, but the GS3 has 10-second cooldown while the Dagger 3 has 12-second cooldown, so they don't align. The benchmark rotation adjusts accordingly, but I would still recommend treating them like the same ability anyway. It makes the rotation simpler and the DPS loss is negligible, so who cares? This way, you always use your weapon skill 3 after your Phantasm into weapon skill 2. So on the Greatsword, you go 4-2-3, while on the Dagger, you go 5-2-3. If you still want to be punctual and use the benchmark rotation, the only thing that changes is the second weapon skill 3 in the Greatsword cycle, where you go 3-4-2 instead of 4-2-3, because the GS3 has a shorter cooldown. But as I said, that's a needless complication. Just remember 4-2-3 and you're good to go. Be careful though, because the GS3 cancels your animations, so try not to cancel your GS2. Yo, I heard you like Phantasm, so I added a Phantasm into your Phantasm so you can Phantasm while you Phantasm. The Signet of the Ether, your healing skill, resets the cooldown of all of your Phantasms, both on your active weapon set and on your inactive weapon set. You want to use it to reset the cooldown of your GS4, because you have already boosted the living hell out of it through Bountiful Blades, so it's the highest damage Phantasm you have and thus the best choice to reset with Signet. Signet's cooldown is short enough for you to be able to use it every time you switch back to Greatsword, so you can always go for GS4, then Signet, then GS4 again at the start of every GS cycle. But just like GS3, it cancels animations, so be careful. Now for the most important part of the Virtuoso's rotation, which is so important I had to leave it for last. And I totally did not forget about it. The Blade Songs. You see, when you summon a Phantasm, it will transform into a clone in a couple of seconds. Is something that I would say if we played any other kind of Mesmer. Virtuosos stack up on blades instead, and you can see those blades down here. The more blades you have, the more powerful your next blade song will become. So whenever you're on 5 blades, you want to use your F1 blade song, which is the power blade song and thus the most powerful blade song you have. But that is not the only use for Blade Songs. You see, thanks to the Deadly Blade trait, using Blade Songs also increases your damage output by 10% for the next 5 seconds. So after you use the F1 Blade Song with 5 blades, you ideally want to keep that buff going for as long as possible by using the other Blade Songs every 5 seconds. But once again, that would be needlessly complicated, so simply use the Blade Songs whenever you notice you're on 5 blades. It's more or less the same. Try using F1 and F2 Blade Songs most often, while keeping the F3 for CC breaks and F4 for survivability. You should be able to use up to 2 5-blade Blade Songs every Greatsword cycle and 1 every Dagger cycle. Lastly, there's a bunch of abilities that I haven't mentioned yet. These abilities are used simply because they deal more damage than auto attacks, so we might as well use them. Anyway, these two don't have any animation, so you can use them at any point in your rotation without messing anything up. The only thing you should look out for is that you want to always use them with the Deadly Blades buff active, to amplify their damage by 10%. So simply start spamming them whenever you use a Blade Song and you're good. These two, however, have animations, meaning that you actually have to fit them somehow into your rotation. The general rule of thumb is that you want to use them in a way that doesn't interfere with the rest of your rotation. So if you've used everything else, use one of these. You want to prioritize this enchanter over the blades because you can squeeze in 2 of them and Ether resets its cooldown. Other utility options are Mantra of Distraction for extra CC, Signet of Humility also for extra CC, and Time Warp for quickness on allies and slow on enemy. But that's it for Virtuoso rotation. I'm sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, the opener. Virtuoso doesn't really have a complex opener like the Chronomancer or Mirage does. Instead, you just use your most powerful ability first, and switch to Greatsword. So first, the aforementioned Phantasmal Swordsman, F1 Blade Song, Disenchanter, and while casting, 1000 cuts. Then you switch to Greatsword, and that's it. Power Virtuoso's entire rotation, cycle, and opener. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope my explanation was passable. See ya!